All right, welcome back. Now, we're going to continue with our use of logs and debug messages. And I've gone ahead and closed out of the Unreal Engine editor. And I'm going to hit Control F5 to compile and launch the editor from Visual Studio. Now, as soon as I load up the editor, I see that I'm back here in my open world level. And since I'd like to be working in our minimal default level, I'd like to change the editor startup map. So I'm going to go to Edit and Project Settings. And here in Maps and Modes, I can change that. We changed it to /open world, but now I'd like to change my editor startup map back to minimal default, just so I open it back up to that level each time I open the editor. So next time I close the editor and open it back up, I'll go back to minimal default. Now I'm going to click on Browse to Minimal Default just to show it in the content browser and double click to open it. Now I've got my content browser docked to the layout here, and just in case you forgot how to do that, I'm going to close out of Output Log and the content browser to get back to the default setting and Control Space to bring up that content drawer again. And just to remind you, I can click Dock in Layout to stick it right there. And I can always get my output log by going to Window and selecting Output Log. And now I have my output log panel here. So let's talk a little bit more about log messages. I'm going to go back to Visual Studio here and make me some room. And I'd like to print the value of delta time in the tick function. And I'd like to do this first with a UE log. So far what we know about UE log is we can type UE log, and we can use the log temp category with the warning verbosity. And we can use the text macro and put a string literal in here, such as delta time. But we don't know how to get the value of the delta time float into our log message. Now this comes back to where I mentioned that UE log has its third parameter called VARGs, that's variable arguments. We can have a variable number of arguments. So after text, we can place a comma here and have another argument. We can have as many arguments as we like in the UE log function macro. Now, if we just place delta time here, then we're now passing this float value into UE log, but UE log needs to be told how to use it. And we do that by the use of format specifiers. Now, if delta time is a float, which in this case it is, we need to tell UE log where to stick this float in our message. And we can specify anywhere in our string literal using the format specifier %f. %f is the float format specifier. What it does is UE log is going to take %f and replace it with the value that we provided as our first argument after the text macro. So let's see how this works. I'm going to go ahead and hit save, and back in the editor I'm going to hit the hot reload icon and let live coding do its thing. Alright, so it's finished. I can close out of that and go ahead and hit play. And now check this out. We're spamming the output log every single frame with delta time followed by the value of delta time. And we see that it's changing. And if we scroll up, we'll see that we're really spamming this log quite a lot. You can see the scroll bar slowly moving up as those messages start to pile up. So that's how we can get the value of delta time printed to the output log. And that's thanks to our use of format specifiers. Now, these format specifiers come from the C++ programming language. In fact, they come from C, which came before C++. And these are related to the C function printf. Now, printf behaves kind of like output log. It can take a variable number of arguments, and it can take a formatted string using these format specifiers. Now, I'm right here on cplus.com. This is a C++ programming reference page, and this table shows us the various format specifiers. Notice that we have the F specifier, so the % with an F on it like we used allows us to format a string using a decimal floating point. And notice that we could use an uppercase F or a lowercase f. Both of them do the same thing. So we have different format specifiers for different data types. We can use D or I in C for a signed decimal integer. That's basically an int like 1 or 2 or -3 and so on. We use U for an unsigned decimal, and there are a number of others. We're not going to use all these. Typically in games programming, we're going to use floats or doubles as well as strings. So now that we know how to format our message for the output log, let's learn how we can do this with on-screen debug messages as well. So what I'd like to do is copy our use of add on-screen debug message. I'm going to copy these lines and simply paste them down here in the tick function. Now we'll be printing these messages to the screen, and of course we're using the key of 1, so new messages will replace old ones. Now I'd like to do the same thing we did for UElog, namely create a string using the %f format specifier to format the string so that it contains the delta time value. So how do we do that? Well, much like the C programming language, the f-string type contains a static function that allows us to format strings. So we can actually create an f-string object right here in the tick function. So in my if statement, I'm going to make an f-string, and I'm going to call this message. And I'm going to use the assignment operator to initialize it to a value. And the value that I'd like to initialize it to is a formatted string. Now we can format a string using f-string followed by the scope resolution operator, and Visual Studio is telling me that printf is a very popular function used with f-string. So you may or may not see printf as the first option there. But if you don't see it there, that's fine. We can type printf. And printf has a constructor that allows us to provide a string and some optional arguments if we're formatting that string. So let's use the text macro here, which is good practice, and say delta time with a colon followed by the %f format specifier, and then a comma after the text macro because printf can take a variable number of arguments much like UElog can. And our next input is going to be delta time. So I'll add my semicolon at the end there. And now we're creating a brand new f-string object and storing it in message. And message is a formatted string. It has the value delta time along with the text resulting from the formatting of this string using delta time. So instead of simply passing in a temporary f-string here, we can actually pass in the message variable, as add-on-screen debug message does take an f-string for this input parameter. So I'd like to see how this works. So I'm going to hit save and come back to the editor and hot reload. And with hot reloading completed, I can press play. And here's our message. It says delta time, and it's updating every single frame, as we can see that last digit flickering between 3 and 4 in my case. So that's how we can format our strings in Unreal Engine by using the f-string data type. So if you're used to regular C++, you might know about the standard library type called string. Unreal Engine has its own versions of some of the types that you'll find in the C++ standard library. And it's always a good idea to use the Unreal Engine built-in types, as Unreal Engine does its best to make sure that all the types and functions it uses are cross-platform, and they'll work for multiple different platforms and not just the Windows platform. So you might be wondering how I knew about the printf function. Well, there are various ways to find out what the different built-in types are capable of. And I'm going to show you those different ways right now. One of the easiest ways to see what a given type is capable of is right-clicking on the type, in this case f-string, and we can either peek the definition of that type or go to the definition. If I select Go to Definition, then a new header file is opened up for me. It's called unrealstring.h, and this is where the f-string data type is defined. We see that it's a class. Now, it has a lot of stuff in here, so it can be overwhelming to look at engine files, but it can also be very informative. We see here under the public section the various constructors. There are several overloads for them. We see that we can create an f-string with no inputs, and that would basically be an empty string. Or we have an f-string that takes another f-string, and we also see that it's overloading certain operators. Now, these are the default constructors. Now, scrolling down, we see more constructors that take inputs of various types. And if we scroll down even further, we can get down to some of the functions that the f-string type has. And you can see that this is quite a big header file. There's lots of code built into the f-string. So this is why it's better than using a regular C++ string. It has lots of different functions. So we don't need to go over this entire file. I just wanted to show you how you can look at the code that defines the f-string type. So I'm going to close out of that. Now, oftentimes when we're programming, we may want to format a string using a string value. So I'm going to show you how to do that now. Now, just above message, I'm going to make another line here. And I'm going to make an f-string called name. And I'm going to initialize this name variable using a built-in function that our actor has inherited, and it's called getName. Now, if we hover over getName, we see that it's a function that returns an f-string, and it returns the name of this object. You see, objects in Unreal Engine have internal names used by the engine. I'd like to print this to the screen so that we can see the name of our item object in the level. So for our message here, where we're formatting a string, I'm going to change it to say item name. And the question is, what format specifier do we use for strings? Well, it's pretty easy to remember. It's %s, s for string. And now that we're using %s, we need to provide a string value. Well, we have this f string here. Now, you would think that we could just replace delta time with name here, but it's not quite that simple. We actually have to use the asterisk operator right here before name. It looks like we're dereferencing a pointer, but that's not really what we're doing. You see, the f-string type has overloaded this asterisk operator for strings. This just means that the f-string type has custom functionality whenever you use the asterisk at the beginning of an f-string variable. And what that asterisk does is provides us with a C-style string. And that's what we have to use when we're formatting strings like this. We can't just pass in an f-string object, we have to pass in a C-style string. And if you recall from basic C++, a C-style string is simply an array of characters. I'm going to take you back to Unreal Engine documentation here. And the Unreal Engine documentation for f-string will show us all the different constructor overloads as well as the functions that belong to f-string with a short description. And if we scroll down enough, we'll find the section called Operators. And this shows us the operators that have been overloaded for the f-string type. And the first one shows us that we're overloading the asterisk operator. And the description says, get pointer to the string pointer to array of tcar, if num, otherwise the empty string. Now, the important part here is array of tcar. You see, Unreal Engine has the type tcar, which is an alias for an array of characters, more specifically wide characters, which are just like the char type, CHER, from C++, only they're capable of storing more information than a char. Remember, Unreal Engine uses the Unicode format, so a single character in Unicode has more information than a single regular character in the ANSI encoding format. You don't need to worry about all that. The important part is that the asterisk overload for the string returns an array of characters, which from here on out I'll refer to as a C-style string. And I'm going to show you another documentation page on the f-string type, which is a little more informative and has some examples of how you would use the f-string in various situations. And one of the tips on this f-string documentation page says, when using %s parameters to include f-strings, the asterisk operator must be used to return the tcar star, which is shorthand for an array of tcars, required for the %s parameter. So it's telling us that if we want to format a string, we have to use that asterisk, which is what we're doing here. We're taking the name f-string, and we're using the asterisk in order to return a C-style string here, which our printf function can use. Now, using this asterisk on f-strings is also required for UE logs. So for example, we could take this UE log message and copy it and paste it right here, just under our add-on screen debug message call. And we can change the text here to say item name, and we can change %f to %s so that we can use a string. And here we can use name, but we do need to use that asterisk operator to convert name to a C-style string here. And now in our UE log, we should print the name of the item. So enough talk, let's see how this works. And now if I press play, now we're spamming the output log with 2 messages each frame. We're printing out the item name and we're printing out delta time. Now notice the item name is BP item with some extra stuff appended to the end of it. That's because that internal name for our item object needs to be kept track of by the engine. And if we have multiple items in the world, they can't all have the same name. They need to have unique names in order for the engine to tell them apart. So if I take my BP item and hold Alt and click and drag to create a second item, now if we press play, we have more messages printed to the screen. I'm going to go ahead and hit stop and scroll up in the log to see this. We have one of our items printing its name, which is BP item C1, and the other item printing its name, which is BP item C0. So Unreal Engine is going to append values to that internal name used for these objects, and that way Unreal Engine can tell them apart. And of course, we're getting delta time printed twice each frame, one for the function call in one of our actors and the other for the function call in the other actor. So it can be easy to spam the output log with lots and lots of messages, which is why it's a good idea to remove these messages once we're done using them. So now that we understand how to format strings and also use formatted strings in the UE log, we're now equipped to use these debug tools to verify the values of things and verify that certain functions are being called while we're programming in Unreal Engine. Great job. I'll see you in the next lecture.